Today, I'm joined by Emma Gentle. What a great name to talk about all things emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Well-Led Schools podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Hornby, school wellbeing consultant, strategist, and former school leader. Together with experts and real school leaders from across the world, we deliver insights and conversations that dive into what it truly takes to support staff wellbeing, strengthen school culture, and lead well with staff wellbeing in mind. Hello and welcome back to the Well-Led Schools podcast. Today's interview is one that I know so many educators and leaders will connect with. Joining me is Emma, or M Gentle, a former teacher and assistant principal turned emotional intelligence coach. With more than a decade of experience across education, M specialises in trauma-informed and neuro-affirming practice, supporting educators and leaders to create emotionally safe, connected and regulated learning environment. Her work helps move schools from reactive to responsive, punitive to restorative, and from stressed to regulated. Through her signature programs, The Emotionally Intelligent Leader and Lead with EQ, she empowers both teachers and leaders to model emotionally intelligent, values-aligned leadership that strengthens culture from the inside out. Today, we're diving into the essentials of emotional intelligence, nervous system awareness, and the powerful influence that leaders have on the collective climate of schools. If you've ever wondered how emotional intelligence shows up beyond theory or how the nervous system of a leader can shape the entire staff, this conversation is for you. Let's jump in. Welcome to the podcast. As I was saying before we hit record, this chat is really timely because emotional intelligence, EQ with leaders and staff has been coming up a lot in schools that I work with lately. So I know that our listeners have this on the brain and this in their periphery for either themselves or their staff. So it gives me great pleasure to present you to our audience today.
Thank you so much for having me. And that's amazing to hear that it's on the tip of everyone's tongue in schools because we need people to be having these discussions.
Well, we work in just such a highly emotional and highly relational profession that if we don't have these skills, that's where we can run into some of those challenges. I was about to say where the wheels fall off the cart, but I don't think that's giving our schools enough grace for everything they're trying to navigate each and every day. But it is something that we have to be equipped with now more than ever, and I'm sure we'll be unpacking that today.
100%.
To get us going, Em, can you let everybody know what's something that you do personally to prioritise or look after your own health and wellbeing?
Oh, well, having two children under 5 and 2 businesses and all the things, as lots of people have these days, lots on their plate, just time by myself. Pre-kids too, I was sort of someone who was quite adventurous and did a lot and just love, you know, filling my time with fun things. And so at home, if I don't get time to fill up my own cup, have time by myself and do things that I enjoy, then I'm just a miserable human.
What are the things you like to do on your own? What's your
I
go-to?
love even just having being a mum, you only get pockets of time. And so it's often just the small things like going for a walk at night, when the sun's setting, or having a cup of coffee on my own, doing some journaling, just sitting on the step. Honestly, it's just those pockets of time, I think, that really help me get through the busy weeks and the busy days.
Yeah, I think that's really underestimated. I've seen it coming up, I think online a little bit from people in the health and wellbeing space or the positive psychology space about moments of micro rest throughout the day to be able to recover and just take a minute, take a beat, rather than just continuously filling our calendars or moving from one thing to the next thing. And the power of that and anchoring to those moments more so that we recognize that our day actually can be quite balanced if we make that time.
Yeah, definitely. I call it micro-regulation, and a lot of teachers that I've worked with have made these little tweaks, and it just makes the biggest difference to the day. intentionally just setting 5 minutes aside to tune back into themselves, take a breath, notice the glimmers. All the stuff that does work is quite simple, but it's just whether we actually implement it for a period of time or not.
Yeah, that's right. I say when I'm in schools, a great strategy is actually to take your lunch break every day
Yeah.
and just use that time to have some a bit of space. I'm like, who would have thought that your legislated break is there for a reason? It could be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. For those who may not know you, that we now know that you have two young children, me too. So we probably have very similar brain brains and brain capacity at the moment. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your work, and the journey that's led you here to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I started in the education system in 2011. Pre that, I was a personal trainer, and I'd had some other jobs before that. But I was 21, and I had moved with my partner quite rural, and so there weren't many PT jobs, believe it or not, when you're an hour away from a major town. And so I was struggling actually to find a job. And the local principal asked Josh if I wanted some hours as a teacher's aide. And I was like, oh, it's a bit random, but sure, like kids are cool. Why not? Anyway, that started as 7 hours a week. And after 2 weeks, I knew that I wanted to become a teacher. And I swore black and blue that I was never going to university. And so all of a sudden I was like, shit, rightio, I have to go to uni then. So I enrolled and,
Damn it.
yeah, damn it. But also, it made it so much easier. So for 3 years, I did my degree. At that time, you could fast track. And so I just did more units at once to get it done quicker. But I was an aide for 14 hours a week through my whole degree. Yeah, and then started teaching as a primary teacher. Taught, I think, for 7 years, and then went into an assistant principal position. I had other sort of smaller leadership positions in that time as well. And then I had my daughter in 2021. And I don't know if this happened to you, but having her just completely blew my mind and changed everything uh, around how I really see the world. And of course, opened Pandora's box. So all of my beautiful childhood trauma that I'd never addressed, uh, yeah, came to the surface. And so I started working through that. And I actually did randomly a digital marketing course on mat leave because that explains my brain. I got a little bit bored and I was like, I just want to do something fun. I don't know. Let's do this. So I enrolled in that, hoping that it would equip me, for something down the track. And I actually had an idea to start designing handbags and like beautiful cases for teachers, like laptop cases. And
Oh, yeah, they'd
I
love
did the
that.
course. Yeah, I did the course. I love the
And
idea of it.
lanyards, that and the
Had
lanyard.
yeah, had the name and everything picked out. And then all of a sudden I was like, Emma, what are you even doing? Like, you have no idea how to manufacture handbags and things. That's just not going to end well. Like, you're not passionate about that. Why don't you start something? Because at this time, too, I couldn't imagine going back full time to the classroom. So I went back and did CRT and then went back 2 days a week, I think, for a term. Yeah. And at that time, I decided that um, after working with my mentor too, who had actually opened a school called Woodline Primary, and it's based on helping educate children to be emotionally intelligent, essentially. So it's a school that's development led, and it's getting back to attachment and play and all these beautiful things. And I went down there and visited that, and I was like, oh my god, this just needs to be everywhere. Like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we supporting children this
Mhm.
way? Like, how nice would it be if everyone, like every teacher, was able to work in an environment like this? Like, the kids can climb in the trees at lunch and recess, and there's normal playing equipment, there's animals, there's a kitchen, like and they get to cook and do all these things. Anyway, I was doing all of that. Um, Sort of unpacking my own trauma work, learning more about that. And at the time, too, the school that I was in, we had quite a bit of a shift in, new families. And there were quite a few families with a heavy trauma background. And so there was just so much happening for me at that time. And yeah, so I was like, I'm so passionate about this. I'm so passionate about equipping teachers with the actual knowledge and skills needed to support children with their behavior and their emotions. And I was always, that was my strength, that relationships was
Mm.
always my strength. So yeah, I launched a business called the Grad Guide, which was a membership for graduate teachers, and didn't go back to school, just went all in on the business. And yeah, that was in 2021. And since then, I started a podcast called Let's Get Schooled, and then end up doing school consultancy and running all these courses and leadership development days and all these cool things that I never imagined doing. Um, and then had my second child last year, so 12 months ago. He's just turned 1, which is absolutely wild.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It
And,
goes quickly with the second.
oh my god, so quick. I cannot believe it's been a year. Yeah. And emotional
And
intelligence, so the reason I focus on that too is that when I was supporting graduate teachers and, schools with supporting student behavior, the through line was always emotional intelligence. So if you want to
mm,
support children in a non-punitive way, then you must be able to not use rewards and punishments every time you feel uncomfortable, every time you actually want children to do things. And so if you weren't self-aware, and if you were getting triggered all the time and becoming really activated, and you were stressed out, which that's pretty much the school landscape at the moment,
mm.
then the supporting children that way is just going to be nearly impossible. So that's why my work ended up moving in that direction.
How amazing. What a journey. And what an incredible school to go to where that's the main priority. We've sent our son to a similar school that's focused more on the whole child. And you sort of threw in there some of the things that they're doing. Like they're able to get outside and they're learning life skills and they're being taught emotional intelligence. But what does that look like for people who are going, oh, I don't work at a school like that, but maybe I could create an environment like that with the students who are in my classroom or in my space?
Mm.
More specifically, what kind of things are schools like that doing? And then schools that you're working with to embed something similar or working towards that?
Mm. Look, I think the main thing is truly understanding behavior and the brain and the body and what children are communicating, because all behavior is communication. And so in these environments, they're designed with that in mind, that the educator understands that when a child is, calling out repeatedly, they're not being bad. There's something
Mm,
underlying there as to why they're calling out repeatedly. Or if
mm,
children can't focus when they're on the mat, like appropriate, um, developmentally appropriate expectations, understanding that as an educator. There's just
yeah,
so many gaps that we missed out on and we
mm,
still do in teacher training today. Luckily, it is moving more towards, understanding attachment, play, neuroscience, that sort of thing, which is great. But that is the challenging thing. If you're in a school where leadership don't understand these things, then you can't really foster it as a school, because it has to be from the top down. And that's the challenge I was running into, especially with grads when I first started mentoring them, was they were like, I'm so passionate about this. I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to embody it, but I just keep, getting slapped with all of these rules, like you must use, you know, um, green behaviors and red behaviors, or you must use the raffle ticket systems, or you must use whatever behavior management system schools would have in place. Teachers would
mm,
be like, I just don't know how to get around it. This is really difficult. And so, yeah, the schools that are doing it really well have leadership teams and principals who understand how children operate and what's really most important and how to support them. And I guess see behavior and well-being as important as academics, because there's always a debate of like which one's better, and it's like that not one's better. Let's look at how we
go
do
hand in
both.
hand.
Like we have
Yeah,
to, yeah, support the whole child. If we're going to teach them, and if they're going to have access to learning, then we need to support the whole child. Like
yeah.
it goes hand in hand. So
And it's the same for our staff too. I mean, I go by the motto which came from a Dabrowski paper in 2020, people first, then pedagogy, or we at least do them both at the same time. So
mm,
I'm like, it's the curriculum doesn't come first and then wellbeing, or we slot it in to do a bit of circle time and run something that comes from our program. I mean, I think that's a great first step is bringing in a social and emotional program. It's better than nothing. But what
Mm,
I'm hearing there is that it's deeply embedded in practice, and that management commitment is huge. I talk about it in my work as well, and in addressing psychosocial risk. If your management and your leadership aren't on board, then it's not going to be then transferred to that middle leadership and then sustained by the collective in any approach. So whether it's well-being or psychosocial risk management or student well-being, whatever it might be.
mm,
But something that stood out as you were just talking there for me is you were saying, I'm working with some staff who get it, or beginning teacher who get that, and then their school's approach goes against that. But I work with a lot of leaders who want to embed more of this approach in their school, and they can't get some staff out of that punitive response mindset, or not really considering the function of behavior. And I see in staff wellbeing surveys people saying, I get really frustrated when leadership say that behavior is just communication. So I think it works both ways. Do you see that in your work as well?
yeah, 100%. And naturally, like if you're offering that support, you're going to get schools who are on board because leadership are coming to you. Whereas when I had
Yeah,
an individual membership, that's where, teachers often
true.
were signing up themselves. But yeah, of
Mhm.
course, like in the teams that I've worked with as well on a whole school level, um, you know, it's always like, well, how do we change the staff? But really, you can't change the staff as much as you want to just be like, okay, this is what we're doing. You must implement these new practices. We don't use punitive measures and blah, blah, blah. The reason I focus on emotional intelligence is because it has to start with the person. Like you are bringing your past experiences, your trauma, your knowledge, your upbringing, your imprints, and they're the things that actually need changing in order for people to show up differently, to believe new things, to be receptive, to be open to new things. Because a lot of the time, too, when we're moving to a non-punitive approach, it brings up shame and it brings up all the times where we've gone against best practice. And so if you don't have a team, or if you're not willing to be vulnerable to say, yeah, I did that, because we've all done it. It's how the system is, and it's how many of us started teaching. And so it's about, and this is part of emotional intelligence, is having the self-awareness to know, what are my imprints? What are my beliefs? How am I showing up? Why have I been shaped that way? And then the self-regulation part is just being able to feel all of those emotions that come with it, that come with the change, that come with the grief and the guilt, and being able to process those so that you can start to take new steps forward. And I think that's why anyone doing this work needs to like not take it lightly, in that it's such huge work that we think that we can quickly overhaul a school, in 12 months or something, but it's going to take such a long time.
Yeah, I really connect with that because a lot of schools I'm with recently, when they're embedding something like Berry Street or trauma informed practices, or really looking at functions of behavior, and they say, oh, well, we've booked everybody in for the training in Berry
Yeah.
Street or whatever it is. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that I know that's one part of it. The theory is one part of it, but how do we connect that understanding? How do we get a shared understanding where our whole group is really on
Mhm.
board? They haven't just had the professional learning. It's
Mm.
then something that gets embedded in it. And that's what you're saying. And Christy Ellett, who was on my podcast recently talking about restorative practices, said the same thing. It's that
Yeah.
mindset behind the approach that we often will neglect because that takes longer or that seems harder. But I actually think there's a real, and you might agree, there's a real magic behind that, because it unlocks many other approaches and things we're trying to do when we focus in that self-awareness space, in that personal development space, as it
Mm.
then helps us with other change initiatives too.
Oh, 100%. Like, and this is what I've seen when people are able to become more emotionally intelligent and become vulnerable and, you know, actually move through those emotions that they've been holding on to for so long. They become
Mm.
more open minded, and they're okay to say, yeah, I mucked that up, or no, I don't actually understand that, or I'm finding this child really hard. Like, I think that there are so many teachers with, as Brene Brown would say, their armor is on, and it's just,
Yeah.
calcifying and keeping everything locked away. The more that we can actually have open conversations and be okay with not knowing everything and be okay with the change and actually see each other as human beings. Like you said, teaching is a relational practice. Like, we are humans and we're working with humans. You just can't not focus on this stuff. If we are to evolve with what we know in research, and the frustrating thing is we've known about this research for such a long time. It's just that I feel like now people are wanting to take more action. There's such a huge movement now with homeschooling and wanting better for our children and supporting neurodivergent learners and understanding trauma. And I can see how teachers and teams feel overwhelmed by that. But honestly, it's not, if everyone can be on a similar page and everyone understands that we're doing it for the good of the children, because that's why we work in schools, for the children, then it makes it easier to, move into it as a collective rather than, well, this teacher does that and this teacher does that. It's like, how are we moving together?
Yeah, I wrote down before when you were talking there about, I'm using the words functions of behavior because that came through in a lot of my training, and that's what we might hear a lot, but I'm sure it's described very differently across different bodies of research. But it's the curiosity behind that for our students, but also for our adults or our teachers who might not be buying into an approach or who do something differently or who have the capacity. It's why are they not buying into it, or why are they doing things that way, or why are they having a hard time? Not in terms of a place from questioning them, but from understanding that. And as you were just chatting then, I thought it would be powerful, even if there are different generations who understand this. I don't want to say easier, but it comes more naturally to them as they are raised into an environment where this is part of the language, whereas somebody else who was born into a different generation from a different style of parenting might find that hard. But like you said, rather than feeling judged or I don't get it, it's like, oh, I was parented so differently, so this doesn't come as easily for me. But you release that judgment. I think there's real power in that too. And when we got on the call before we hit record, you did that so beautifully just with me as an adult. We were laughing about the fact I said that my emotional regulation was really good until I had children and I had to try and get them out the door into school. And you just asked such a beautiful question, like, were you ever rushed out the door, or is that something that happened to you? And I was like, oh, maybe that is why I find that really hard. I can't remember, but it will probably come to me at 2 o'clock or while I'm in the shower. But that kind of curiosity is so empathetic and allows you to drop into a deeper level of thinking or understanding about a human who's right in front of you.
And this is the work that I do with school leaders, because when they can unpack their own story and understand their own imprints and why they see things a certain way and why they react to certain things, and go that little layer deeper, then everything starts to make sense. And when you do this work on yourself, you can give everyone else the most generous assumption. You don't walk around pointing the finger, blaming, because as Lael Stowe would say, if you could see everyone, behind closed doors and know their story and know what's going on for them, we would all just be understanding, compassionate humans. And that is it. Like,
Mhm.
that is why the armor needs to come down and everyone needs to be more curious and open and understanding. But that doesn't happen unless we do our own work.
Yeah, so powerful.
Yeah.
Was there a moment in your leadership journey, or was it the moment when you had a child? And I noted down when you said that your eyes opened up when you had a child. I always say that Ruben taught me the lessons that I wasn't able to learn before I had children, like acceptance and, release of control over things that I had absolutely no control over. I definitely learnt that when I had a baby who wouldn't sleep in those early days. But was there a moment in your leadership where you realized that emotional intelligence and nervous system awareness were the missing pieces for educators?
Mm. Yeah. I think definitely, after having my firstborn, we had heaps of challenges too with sleep, and I had so much anger and rage, and honestly, that's what sort of led me towards this journey, because I had definitely internalized my anger and had a lot of shame around anger. And, after doing work with someone, understanding that actually my needs were not met at certain periods in my childhood, and I had so much pent up anger that had never been released in a healthy way. When I was able to work through that, it completely changed me, and that's how I've come to this work, is by doing it myself, not just reading some books on EQ. Like, I don't know if anyone could do that, to be honest, because I just don't think that you can teach this work if you haven't embodied it yourself, because it's
Mm.
so much harder to understand if you're just reading it on pages. Like, I remember my daughter not sleeping and punching the bed next to her, just to being like, "Why won't you go to sleep?" and being so angry, and then the next day having so much shame and guilt and being like, "Why am I such a bad mum? Why did I do that?" And not knowing or not understanding that so much of my anger wasn't to do with that moment. It was from my own childhood and my own, things that had happened to me growing up. And so this is what happens in classrooms. Certain children will activate you when they have big behaviors or they're defiant, and I say that with talking marks.
Yeah.
Defiant is just obviously another behavior. But this is what happens, and we wonder why we can't move to non-punitive measures, because we are so activated internally, and so we just need to shut it down or control the situation, like you said, or dismiss it or punish them, and it's always based on what we got or what has happened to us, and not only just in childhood, but just our whole story. Because it can be in our teenage years or our early adult life. Like, our belief systems and our imprints are based on all of those things. So, yeah, if we're not going to that deeper layer, then we're really just skimming the surface. And it's why a lot of people don't sustain that behavior change.
And it really makes me think about the staff we see who are at different levels of their ability, like you said, not just reading it on a page, but to really take it in. Maybe it's probably linked to their own experience or their own journey with developing themselves or understanding who they are that they're on. Do you think it's easier for people to get this? I was about to say get this or understand it if they've had that background, but you can have that background and not have dealt with it. And you can be somebody who's developed yourself and learn a little bit about yourself too. So it would really depend, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
definitely feel like mine helps me understand those children more. Whereas I'm
Mm,
sure there are many educators or people who work in schools who had a
mm.
trauma background and they still don't understand themselves, so don't that yet understand that behavior. It would be really complex, isn't it?
Yeah, I think everyone is just on their own journey, but I think, though, you have to be willing to see it. Like, I
Mm.
see, and the people, in my opinion, who aren't willing to look at it are probably carrying so much pain that they just know that once they look at it, it's going to bring a world of hurt. But what I want to say to them is, I just want to give them a big cuddle and say that what you're imagining is far worse than actually what it is. Like, holding on to it your whole life, that is far more painful than actually going there and unpacking it and feeling like you can heal those parts of you and give yourself those things that you didn't get. And that's a lot of the work that I do with leaders, is
Mm.
the reparenting and the holding space for, those
Yeah.
wounded parts of us. And you don't have to have a trauma background. By society, a lot of us have just grown up, you know,
Mm.
um, being able to be seen and not heard, and so you've got to shrink and you've got to do as you're told and that sort of thing. Be a good girl and a good boy, and so you don't have to have had trauma. You might be an adult now who doesn't know how to get their needs met, and you do fall into those people pleaser tendencies. And that's why I look at the nervous system with all the leaders I work with, and we look at your patterns and why you make those decisions. And it's always from a lens of safety. So, yeah, no, you definitely don't have to have a trauma background, but it does explain why everyone is on a different journey.
Mm. Could imagine the work you're doing would be a real art to it because not everybody wants to or is ready to develop and change yet. And so delivering PL to large groups of people, you have to expect that there will be people who would find that challenging or who'll just disengage. Like you said, not because they don't want to move the school along or they don't want to join in, but because they've probably got, I explain it like the analogy of, and I use this to understand my parents. I'm estranged from my father, but I've always understood our relationship by going by him dealing with the pain that happened between us, probably inflicted by two people. He actually, it's like a big knot, a big wool ball full of knots. And to get to the knot between him and I, he has to undo a lot of other knots on that outside. And that could delay his ability to reach us and our relationship in that thing. And so we need to think about that there are staff in our schools who aren't deliberately being cynical or not buying in, but because it's much bigger than just the change initiative that we're rolling out. And
It's
to offer
huge.
that hug, that the air hug, they probably wouldn't let us hug them.
You could ask if they would allow it, or maybe a high five or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I used to say to I still say it. I would spend most of my time with my staff who I knew were the ones who needed the hug. They
Yeah.
tended to push a lot of people away at school, but I was determined to give a lot of my time to trying to build that relationship with them. And I think that pays off in dividends more than
Oh,
making more connections
100%.
across the school. I would go for those really hard staff, and it does, it
Yeah.
works.
Oh my God, of course. And I think if we see humans as just children in adult bodies, that change, and that's what I always say to the staff that I'm supporting, is if you can look at your teams and look at your teachers as children, then you're going to, interact with them completely
Yeah.
differently. And
Yeah.
like I said, give them the most generous assumption, like look behind their behavior and wonder what's going on for them rather than
Yeah.
trying to force or force change. I think that's where we can go wrong sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
We're all just big kids in
We are
who are
in
just a
adult
little bit older. When we're tired, I revert back to being a child all the time. So I can admit that. Must be my emotional intelligence, which means I can admit that. Like,
No, I
I'm
think, yeah, we've
getting
all got reduced capacity. That definitely happens.
it's a full spectrum here. Okay, so like we've talked about, we alluded to this before. Emotional intelligence is a term that we hear often in schools and more over the last couple of years.
Mm,
But what does it look like when it's embedded in a school setting versus just introduced as a professional learning topic?
mm. Oh my goodness. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of environments that are like this yet, but
Yeah.
um, Woodline Primary probably being an environment that does, but obviously they built that school knowing that that's how it was starting, and so that's, I guess, a bit of a prerequisite that you have to be open to working on yourself. Um, I think that, well, first and foremost, so if you look at Daniel Goleman's model, he is a psychologist, American psychologist, and his 5 pillars are self-awareness, so understanding how your emotions, behaviors, and thoughts impact how you show up. That's where we look at your imprints, your belief systems, all that sort of thing, your patterns. Self regulation, so being able to regulate your emotions and your behavior and your thoughts. And then we have empathy. So I always look at the empathy lens through sort of more of the compassion lens, because a lot of the
Yeah.
time we're working on the self compassion, because then that ripples out to everybody else. If you can't give it to yourself first, then you're probably not going to give it to others. And then social skills. So obviously how you communicate and interact with people, as relational beings. And then motivation. So looking at your intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, your values, how you're showing up, your purpose, your why, and that sort of thing. So if you think about all of those elements, I guess we're diving into all of those things and using those to curate or create the environment in a school. So having teachers and leaders that are self-aware, who are able to understand why they might say things or do things, why they might have for example, if you are every day so unaware that you are snapping at everyone and you're racing around like a headless chook. And this is what I see often. And this was me definitely at points in time when I had a year 1, 2 class, and I like to just be on the go, which I am a high energy type person. But now that I look back too, and often this is what happens, you start doing this work and you're like, oh my God, totally. I look back and think, whoa, so dysregulated. um, running around like a headless chook and projecting your unprocessed emotions, your low capacity, your stress levels onto everyone else. So we need the self aware humans. That's what the work is. Once we're self aware, we can choose some sort of regulation, whether that is going to the roots and doing the inner work, and looking at our childhood and our imprints. And honestly, a lot of this work just doesn't really stick unless we do that. And that's why I do now the deeper work with leaders, because if we're not doing that, in my opinion, everything else is just scratching the surface and we don't have that longevity, or we don't have that real change. Um, yeah, and all of that, and how we've been brought up and how society impacts us obviously impacts whether we're compassionate, whether we have much self-compassion, which most of us, especially women, have grown up, you know, not being very kind to ourselves, and therefore either projecting it out or not being kind to others, or going the opposite and being really kind to others but not being kind to ourselves. So that makes a big difference. And communicating, like, oh my God, none of us have been taught how to communicate our needs to be met, how to actually just communicate when we're upset, how to set boundaries, how to be okay with someone else being upset with our boundaries. Like, emotional intelligence is honestly the skill set of of leadership, of conscious leadership. And so I guess that's what it looks like in schools, having teachers and leaders being open with one another, being able to reflect on how the day went and not making it mean something bad about themselves, but also equally getting honest with yourself to go, oh yeah, I actually did muck up there, like, or that was a bad decision, or, and then being able to give ourselves the self-compassion to go, well, maybe this is what I need, or how do I fill my own cup? What is my capacity like? Like, it's really huge in well-being, as in, if you don't have the level of emotional intelligence needed to be in a leadership position, then you probably are going to burn out. And I think that is why a lot of people are burning out, because they don't know themselves first and foremost. And then when they do know themselves, they have to learn all of these other skills in order to get their needs met, which requires regulation and boundary setting and asking for what they need and stepping outside their comfort zone. So that's what it looks like in a school, being able to do all of those things. And we didn't even touch on student behaviour.
Well, I think what I was about to say then was we sort of talked a lot about understanding that for us, but that's the gateway then to understanding and extending that compassion and awareness and regulation, and build your social skills with other people, and then as a leader motivate others rather than just yourself. So that's definitely the gateway then to how that interacts then with other people, for sure. And when you were talking about boundaries, it made me think, I don't know whether you've seen it going around on social media at the moment. It's like all these people trying to
Yeah.
drink a glass of water in their handshake. It's like my brain thinking I'm running away from a lion, but I just enforced a boundary. And I'm like, it made me
Yeah,
laugh all the
that's
time.
how
Or
it feels.
yeah, or I set a boundary with a family member and they just completely freak out.
Yeah,
I get it. There
yeah.
are things that set me off in that same way, that I literally probably think that I'm dying at the time, and my husband is like, "You got an email about, something, or someone didn't write back to you on time." But it's because it all comes down to something historically, and it's such important work. Yeah, and it takes time. I think this is the thing that schools need to, and probably why they shy away from it, is that it's a time investment, because it doesn't happen in one workshop. It
This is the biggest gripe of, like, schools and school plans and, like,
Yeah.
what's the next initiative? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it's
Yeah.
like, guys, if we just stripped it back and went back to basics, honestly, the quality of our learning and our teaching and learning would just be so much better anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but, the whole system at the moment, and this is why the nervous system talk, I think, is so important, in that collective nervous systems at the moment are just so highly stressed and, um, in that fight flight energy, everyone is sort of, I'm finding either fight flight, obviously, or if you've been there for too long, then dropping way down into shutdown. And that's when you're having the teachers who are just like, I don't give a fuck anymore, because they
Yeah.
don't have any capacity to
Mm.
care anymore. Not that they don't care. So it's sort of like one end of the spectrum. And that is huge in schools because everyone is feeding off one another. And
Mm.
I think that's a huge contributor to why student behaviour is just huge at the moment.
Mm.
And also,
Mm.
I think we're in this weird time where parents are understanding too that, well, they're doing this work on themselves and they're wanting their children to be themselves. And so they're also allowing their children not to mask and not be good little
Mm.
girls and boys. And so obviously with that comes the bigger behaviors, the bigger emotions, all of that sort of thing. And so if we've already got burnt out teachers who just don't have capacity for that, then it's just never going to end well. So I feel
Yeah.
like there's just all that energy at the moment.
Mm.
Mm.
And you mentioned before about we've known this for a while, but it's only kind of just coming in. And what's the saying that when something comes out in research, it takes 20 years to make it into mainstream practice? And that's definitely what we're beginning to see now. But you made a
Yeah.
really important point there around that awareness and the regulation and how that's the gateway. And that's even been a big understanding for me lately. I talk about the difference between personal well-being for educators and then workplace well-being, how things are experienced at work and psychosocial risks. But now what I'm starting to really speak on is that you can learn that and you can understand those elements of it. But the gateway is really foundationally recognizing in ourselves when we become dysregulated, when stress is something that's becoming unmanageable and we're not completing that stress cycle, and how that's
Mm.
then affecting our thoughts and behaviors.
Mm.
Because if that's not going well, then we can't tend to all these multiple dimensions of our well-being, and we can't even apply coping strategies or develop them further to be able to navigate then the psychosocial risks over in this side of workplace well-being, or engage in coaching and mentoring
Yeah.
these personal development and professional development opportunities when
Mm.
that piece isn't there. But then the other piece is that leaders also need to have the capacity to recognize when, of course, they themselves aren't well and when they are, but also it's their duty to recognize it in their staff and then respond to that. So if we just
Yeah.
pulled it back to those middle two gateways to all of the other things falling into place,
Mm.
we'd be able to flourish from there.
100%. And this is the work that I did. I ran a 10-week group coaching program with leaders last year called Lead with EQ. And a lot of the work really looked at the their own imprints. And so we looked at, why do you have people pleasing tendencies? Why do you overwork? Why do you say yes to everything? Um, you know, because some of these leaders were just exhausted. And yes, there was talk around, student behavior and that it was getting bigger and that it was hard. But honestly, a lot of the realizations were from just their own programming, their own expectations of themselves, and understanding that potentially they even went into the profession trying to feel loved and worthy. Because I think you'll find too, a lot of nurses and teachers, those professions, it comes from a place of wanting other people to have what you didn't have.
Yeah.
And so then you're going above and beyond and you're wanting
Yeah.
to be seen, you're wanting the approval, the praise, the love, and you're doing anything for it. And so you're working ridiculous hours and just doing all these things and not looking after yourself. And that's where the burnout comes from. Like,
Mm.
I think that we can all operate differently in the system if we focused on our own selves first and we're able to then bring that into a workplace where it's accepted and everyone's sort of on the same page. But yeah, if we're not looking at what is actually driving our behavior and our choices, like you said earlier about the function of behavior, that's what we're looking at. Why you behave
Mm.
the way that you do. Um,
Mm.
yeah, it's huge. It's huge work.
And spoiler alert for anyone listening, in all the schools that I've worked with, when we'll spend a year really identifying, diagnosing what's happening in relation to wellbeing, building in some foundations, and then we talk about, okay, well, where to next? Now the partnership's done, and what are we going to explore now in terms of development? Most schools I work with say emotional intelligence for our leaders and for our staff. So I'd be encouraging anyone listening and for students, I'd be encouraging those listening to start considering how we begin to embed that as part of our budget or as part of our timing in upcoming years. We know we have to forecast a couple of years ahead because, like we've shared today, it would make such an immense difference in all of those other spaces if that's something that our staff not only understand from a theoretical standpoint, but understand in themselves and develop themselves. And I've talked about this on the podcast before. This follows on from that. When staff develop themselves, staff leaders, students develop themselves in that way when they work in a workplace, they become more loyal to that workplace, I think, when they develop under that level of leadership. It improves retention, and their loyalty and affinity and admiration for that school is that if that shift happened at your school for them, they're not going anywhere, because that's
No.
just such an amazing safe space for them to be.
Exactly, and if that's what's valued, then that's huge, and like you said, just even the ripple effects of the teachers doing this work, then obviously it's going to go down to the students, and that's what I find really funny is that we just spend so much time trying to fix the students or change the students, when if we actually just focus on the humans teaching and holding the students, then the students' outcomes would
Oh,
change.
I know. I was at a school the
Honestly,
other day,
that's
and
good.
the staff said we need to send our students off for respect training or emotional regulation training, and was like, no, we
Ah.
need that so that we
They
can
have, yeah,
respond when they're dysregulated and support them.
that's a whole 'nother
Then
podcast on its own, just that.
yeah, but I was like, okay,
Uh,
and I understand it because they're going, we have to know literacy. It is in primary. We have to know literacy, numeracy, inquiry, and
yeah,
all of the things. But
yeah.
like we said, I think all of that would just land if we had
Oh,
those basic foundations.
yeah, and social emotional programs, like, are great, but if you don't have emotionally intelligent teachers and leaders, then they're gonna fall flat anyway. Like, same with
Oh,
wellbeing. If you're focusing on the wellbeing of the kids, work on the wellbeing of the adult. Like, it's yeah,
oh,
hold the adult and they'll hold the kids naturally, and then they'll
no.
teach the children what they know, or they'll be able to hold space for their emotions and their behaviors, and yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
I think all the circle times I ran, these kids are probably looking at me like, she's yelling at us all day and she's telling us how to have a productive conversation
Take
with
your
somebody
breath.
else.
Take your
Like,
own advice.
what's this idiot doing?
Totally. That is what happens
I
though.
know. I say it to my son all the time, I'm like, why are you raising your voice? And then another morning, I'm like, we, I'm exposing myself. Anyway, let's move on. I've given away too much about my own home life.
No, I think
Uh,
that conversation actually is one of the most important, to be honest, because I think people are scared of, like, not being perfect and yelling and doing the opposite, and that is just not possible. Like, oh my god, I get and it all comes back to capacity. If we just address people's capacity, you would understand why you yell or why you do certain things, and it does just come back to those things. So,
yeah.
yeah, don't get the shame stick out, which we can sometimes, but yeah.
I walked into a school the other day and I was tired. I think it was the end of last year, sorry. I was end of term tired. And someone said, how are you? And I was like, good. And she goes, are you? I think she could probably tell. My hair was everywhere. I don't know. And I said, oh, listen, I am actually exhausted. Like, it's just that end of the year. I'm really run down, but I'm here. I'm ready to deliver it at the end. She said, you know what? I would actually get a lot of benefit out of you telling me that sometimes you're not okay, or you're
Oh,
tired, or you're run down. And it's not that I ever don't do that, but sometimes you don't want to deliver a wellbeing workshop and you're like, ugh. But I said, that really connected. I was like, yeah, we do need to have more of those conversations rather than being the martyr all the time.
Oh, yeah, I think that's probably why schools often like my PD, because I am
Yeah.
like an open book and I probably overshare and I give them all the things, but I think that helps bring that armor down and they're like, "Oh
Oh,
god, okay. You know this stuff, but you're just a real person." Well, yeah, we are. We're people. That's
mm,
what this work is about, accepting that we are human beings. Mm,
mm. And
yeah.
sometimes a bit of a hot mess, aren't
Ah,
we all?
absolutely. Yeah.
We've started talking about this just before. Many leaders or schools are trying to fix behaviour and they're introducing, like what we talked about, these systemised approaches to student management without addressing regulation. So, what shifts when schools actually focus on nervous system regulation or nervous system awareness instead?
Yeah, well, it's just understanding what's driving the behavior and so much of the big behaviors that we see. And this is what happens. There's a lot of focus on the big behaviors. So, a lot of the like fight, flight energy, when we can have a lot of dysregulated learners who are actually in shutdown or in freeze and fawn. And that they equally need just as much support. It's just that they're not, waving the white flag like the other children are that have these big behaviors. But the reason we need to understand nervous systems is because that is what is often driving the behavior. And so if you are seeing children, flip tables, get really aggressive, running out of the room, that sort of thing, then that is them waving a flag to say, I feel so unsafe right now. I need you to help me come back into safety. And regulation just means imbalance, homeostasis, and our children's brains are not fully developed. Yet to a point where they're able to self regulate. And so we need the adult in the room to be able to co regulate with them and be with them so that they can weather the storm with them. So it's not about trying to fix or trying to shut things down. It's about being able to be with the child when whatever is happening. Obviously, we need safety, but Billy Garvey said this to me one day too that has stuck with me, and I say it to everyone. The child that's having the biggest behavior in the classroom is the most unsafe. So they are always feeling the most unsafe. We often tend to want to protect everyone around us, which makes sense. But if we actually focus more on the child that is feeling unsafe and having those big behaviors, then that's in turn going to help reduce those big behaviors. So if we're not understanding the nervous system and we're not understanding what's going on before, and I always sort of go through, I imagine like a volcano, we're looking at what the child's doing before they erupt because there's often a lot of signs, but they get missed. And so if we don't understand what's going on behind the behavior for the child internally, then it's going to be so much harder to support them. And that is why if we just slap a consequence on or we try and, give them a reward, it doesn't do anything. We're not addressing the underlying causes, the root causes of why the child's behaving that way in the first place. So, and it's often linked to the safety of the child and what's going on for them internally. So that's why it's so important. And if we have educators who don't understand that, then we just have dysregulated adults,
Mm.
in classrooms and they can't regulate a dysregulated child. So it just ends up
Mm.
in a bit of a disaster.
I see it almost fitting in to a big holistic and integrated approach. Like, I think so many schools go, okay, like restorative practices is us, or positive behaviors for learning is us, or, we're more of a punitive based school, or we really think about the functions of behavior and co regulation, and they get really wedded just to that one thing. And as you were
Yeah.
talking, I was thinking, well, yes, like, co-regulating is a strategy that you would apply, but then you're still also applying recognition of positive behaviors too. And then after an incident, you're using your restorative conversations. Outside of that, you're also modeling and talking about things and running your lessons and embedding all of your matrices and school-wide expectations. It's not just going, okay, I believe in this co-regulation space.
Yeah.
And so that's the only thing I do is this student needs to be, I need to co-regulate with them all the time. And then you just abandon everything else. This is what we do, isn't it? Well, it's like a whack-a-mole. So I hope people don't this and go, I'm just going to co-regulate with that really hard student in my classroom all the time, but then not actually teach the behaviors or have the conversation. So please, nobody do that. But I think they will. If they get obsessed with a new strategy or something they learn.
And I think that that's why it's hard, in that there's so many different building blocks of all this, like you just said. So, and when I first started consulting or doing workshops, they were the workshops that I had, and often the schools that work with me long term did all of them. So I had restorative practice, supporting children's behavior, non-punitive, so looking at rewards and punishments, trauma informed support around behavior, and that was a lot of the regulation as well. And what was the other one? There was another one. But I think it was just well-being of the staff. Because
Mm.
like you said, it's just a holistic lens of supporting a human being. It's not one thing is better than the other. It's like, if you can actually understand all of it as a whole of how beings function. And this is the problem, in that there's not enough education for teachers around attachment and child behavior and how the brain and
Yeah.
body works as you're developing as a teacher. And I think even if you got that at uni, say, and then you got into a school who had like no recognition of any of that and didn't look at any
Mm.
of that, then you're not going to develop those skills and you're not going to develop those
It just
understandings. So it
disappears.
really has
Yeah.
to be, yeah, like a whole school level, looking at all of that. And that's what I love to do. Is I had one school in particular, a K to 12 school, do all of that, and they had support. I even had a course for teachers aides, and like at every level they sort of spent the year educating themselves on all of that. Oh, supporting neurodivergent learners, that was my other
Mm.
workshop. And so yeah, they spent a year learning about all of the research and theory that underpinned all of that, and started implementing strategies and looking at it from a whole school level. And yeah, they made heaps of changes. They couldn't believe
Yeah.
how quick they made changes over 12 months, but it was because everything was from that holistic
Mm.
lens, and not just, let's just do this one thing.
Yeah, I think schools really fear that multiple lens approach, and how we used to bring it together when I was at school. So this is a tip. This isn't just a tip I'm making up. I said to Em, sometimes I come up with solutions that I just make up, but this is actually this is not one that's made up. It works, and it's from research. Is that putting in place beliefs and practices. So beliefs and practices around student engagement or regulation or managing students or co-regulation, whatever it is. And you can have we believe X, Y, and Z. And so therefore these are the practices that you see at our school. And it can
Yeah.
then come from multiple different models or approaches or theories, rather
Mm.
than just going, we do this one
We just do
program
this one thing.
here at
Yeah.
this school. Yeah, I think. And then also it stops staff, because we used to also have staff going, oh, well, last year we were using bump it up walls for literacy, and then now this year we've moved
Oh,
into guided reading groups. I'm like, we
totally.
haven't lost the bump it up walls. Like they're part of a well-rounded approach. So that's why we did our beliefs and practices. Is like, we believe in high quality, rich text. And when we come back to this student management approach, you can do that in the same way. So we believe
Yes.
that restoring a relationship after an incident is key, and so therefore you see restorative practices in place. We believe in co-regulation or looking at functions of behaviour, therefore we adopt this, this, and this. So that's also fine, and I think that's a great way to bring together the fact that lots of things will be introduced, and so staff
Yeah.
shouldn't get confused, but we also have to maintain their understanding and
Yeah.
training and deeper level of work within those systems.
Yes, and I think that's where we get tripped up, and what a lot of experienced teachers hate too is like, oh, now we're doing this thing. So now we have to change everything to do this thing. Whereas when you're
Mm.
having, it's a little bit more open-ended, in that we're showing up a certain way, or we believe in these values and this is how we embody them. We, like you said, these are our
Mhm.
beliefs and this is how we're actually going to embody them. We're going to operationalize them. What does it look like in your environment? Because in your classroom and my classroom, it might look slightly different, and that's okay. And I think that's
Mm.
what a lot of teachers are disliking about where teaching is going, is that there's no autonomy, and it's like very rigid in that
Uh,
this is how we do things. And so they're like, well, I can't be me. I can't be a person, a human being that has, you know, different parts of me that I want to show up because it doesn't align with this specific approach. Yeah, I
Mm.
think that that does a lot of damage. So I really love what you just said there.
Yeah. It's our job as leaders to hold an initiative. So we have to consider then how we keep that at the fore, or an
Mm,
approach or a belief. It's not staff's fault that because we haven't talked about it or come back to it or rumbled in a hard conversation over it in a while and then they've forgotten about it. We've got to keep that going.
mm.
How can staff and leaders safely seek feedback on their emotional impact on others?
Oh, this is a good one. I genuinely think first, though, just start to work on your own self awareness. Like
Mhm.
95 or 5% of the population are self aware. So that gives you a lot of indication about how many
I'm in
people
that
are
I'm in
walking
that
around.
5%. I'm in that.
Yes, you definitely are. If you're having these conversations,
I
you
know.
definitely are.
I know.
I think that the coming at it first with saying,
So
"This is what I think is going on for me, and this is what I've noticed," getting really curious without judgment, being like, "This is what's going on for me. Um, what do you think? How can you see this playing out?" Or, you know, I honestly think we just have to be open. And knowing though that the other person is going to have their own lens in how they see things and whether you actually want to take that on. Like I love Brene,
Mhm.
always going back to Brene in that like if your ass is not in the arena getting kicked, then I don't care what you think. Like
Yeah,
it can be a
yeah.
little bit hard in that sense. Like if you're going to a person who you know is probably not very self-aware themselves, then
Mm,
who knows what you're going to get.
yeah.
I'm trained in through 6 seconds, you can become an EQ assessor. And so I can undertake with leaders actual emotional intelligence assessments. And so
Okay.
they do it, answer the questions, and then they get a detailed report, a leadership report, and we go through
Cool.
the different parts. And the reason I really love it too is that, like we were saying before, it's you can operationalize it. So you can look at what it looks like in your environment and you can go away and actually use the tools and techniques to become more emotionally intelligent. It's not just like heaps of words and then you never look at it again. And then we do sort of like about an hour coaching session around, what they've noticed. So that
Mm,
tends to be great for schools because schools are always wanting actual hard concrete data. And
yeah.
when you're playing with emotions and imprints and belief systems and things like that, then it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So
Mm,
that's a great way to get
okay.
concrete answers.
I like
Um,
that. And I think I was talking about this with the school the other day. We were talking about tools for this and developing their leaders, and they're
uh,
like, it's almost like the 360-degree feedback tool is almost too much early on. Like, you've really got to be ready to receive that and then to be able to give that feedback about somebody who you know might need development there. So that sounds like a great gateway once people have maybe started dabbling in their own personal
yeah,
self-assessments and journaling and reflection to
yeah,
then step into something like that
yeah.
before they go into something as heavy as a 360 tool.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to look at the different domains, like how emotional intelligence shows up. Because as we were saying too off air, like you can be more emotionally intelligent in one area of your life compared to another. Like a lot of the principles too that I've coached say that being emotionally intelligent at work feels easier. And then I come home and I unleash on my family because they activate me so much more. And so then it's the discussion around so are you actually being emotionally intelligent during the day? Like, are you actually able to regulate your
Mhm.
emotions during the day, or are you actually bracing and holding on to it all? And, it's a bit of fake regulation. And then you get home and you just release it. Because really, if we're actually paying attention to how we're feeling over the day and being able to come back into balance, then we should be able to go home and still be in balance. Like, yes, we're going to get activated
Mhm.
by things, but if you're just holding on to it all day, I wonder, are you actually showing up as your authentic self at work, or are you putting on a mask and
Mm.
just holding everything in until you get home? So it brings up these
Oh,
really beautiful discussions around, is
yeah.
it true regulation? Do you even know what regulation is? Like, what does that feel like in the body? because so many of us have never done this work. Like, you didn't grow
Mm.
up understanding how emotions feel in your body and how that impacts the way that you think and vice versa, and why you might think that way, and how your story creates your state. Like, there's a lot to it there. And so, yeah, I think that if people are just willing to get curious and just start to pull on the threads, then you're only going to figure out more about yourself.
Oh. If a leader and educator is going, I want to start this journey, or I want to start the next chapter of this, as we know, this is, I feel like we're building this emotional intelligence for our whole lives. But if somebody is listening and they're ready to get going today or tomorrow, what are the first small steps that you'd suggest to begin their their journey?
Yeah, so I would start to, well, also the reason I love coaching is it's very
Mm.
nuanced. Like, I really dislike here's a blueprint, just follow that, because
Yeah.
it doesn't work. Like, we take into
No.
account your background, whether you have had trauma or not, and whether we have to go really gently there. Like, the first work that I do and lead with EQ is we're looking at exteroception and interoception, because if you're feeling activated, but you have never been able to tune into your own bodily sensations, and that feels really unsafe to you, then doing an introceptive practice is going to feel more dysregulating for you. And this is what we need to understand with kids in the classroom with trauma. Like, if we're trying to get them to do deep breathing and pay attention to their body clues, when actually that's a really unsafe thing for them to do when they're at home, that's going to further dysregulate them. And it's why, like, we can't just do often blanket things, and why we need to understand the nervous system driving the behavior. And so then we focus on exteroception, which is using our outer surroundings to be able to regulate. So it's quite nuanced. And so I would sort of start there, in that if you go to tune into yourself and it feels really uncomfortable, like, why might that be? Just start trying to understand where you've come from and your own experiences and what's going on for you. Obviously, there's going to be probably external symptoms that you've seen, so maybe you do become heightened and you're yelling all of the time, or you feel flustered all of the time, or you have like a clenched jaw and your shoulders are always raised and your heart is beating really fast, or you're having certain thoughts. Like, just start noticing your patterns. Journaling's beautiful for this, just being able to notice things that happen, interactions, um, and just start there. Because once you start to
Yeah.
go, oh, okay, I think that I've noticed that actually I can't be present and I'm just racing around all the time and I'm always thinking of the next thing and the next thing. Like, does that mean that I am in balance, or am I
Yeah.
just running around? You know what I mean? Or you might notice the
I've never
opposite.
thought about it. I've never thought about it that way of being prepared for it's an amazing thing. So I know I've been through many different chapters of learning and evolving and finding out something new about myself or unpacking something further. But I think back to, I feel so much better for it now. But at the time, it's a lot because you see things in a different color, or you notice things more, or it
Mhm.
can be quite alarming. So it's about, holding
Yeah.
that, just having that support around yourself. And it makes it such. I started to think then about when you were talking about that. Was it introspective ways, is that
Interception.
maybe I
Mm.
yeah, I always found it really hard to, like, do deep breathing and meditate and be able to concentrate, and it was really dysregulating for me. In fact, sometimes when I'm really heightened, it makes me feel more flustered. So it's about listening
Mm.
to you there. By working with somebody, they can tailor something that suits you and your story and your needs and the chapter that you're at, rather than just
Yeah.
reading a
Yeah.
book about this and then applying the strategy. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think it depends on your unique situation. Like, if you know that you've got a bit to unpack, or there's a bit of a history there, then yeah, go and do it with a trauma informed practitioner. Like, don't just start
Yeah,
trying to do stuff with random people or do it on your own. Like, go and get the support that you
yeah,
need, because there is a big difference, I think, between, like, wanting to look at your imprints and heal those wounded parts of you so that you do have sustained regulation, so that you're changing your internal operating system essentially. And that is what's going
mm,
to bring true regulation, true homeostasis to yourself. So that's sort of like the deeper work that I love to do.
Mm.
Whereas you can work with other people who sort of work more on the surface and do surface level things. Like part of it is just looking at your overall well-being and seeing how you're treating yourself, whether you're getting enough
Mm.
sleep, nutrition, exercise, water, how are your relationships, all of that sort of stuff.
Mm.
So if you don't want to go deep, like look at those surface level things. But if you know that you're probably operating from past patterns and ways of behaving that have kept you safe but don't serve you now, then the deeper work often is required. But it's just about whether you
Mm.
are willing to do it, whether you're in the right place to do it, and
Mm.
yeah, and what's going on for you personally.
Remember I used to do it when I was one-on-one coaching. People would disclose certain things and I'm like, okay, I am
Yeah,
still happy to work with you in this place, but you're going to need to go and
time
speak
to refer.
to
Yeah.
a psychologist or someone who's specialized in that area for that particular topic because all right. You mentioned that you have some resources to share with the audience. So a momentum call or your EQ assessment, we can link those up in the show notes. But do you want to just quickly explain what those are for our listeners?
Yeah, totally. So, a momentum call is a 90-minute call with me where we do look at what's going on for you, whether you've started this work or, you've had a life change or you're just wanting to make some changes in your life and become more emotionally intelligent. And so we spend 90 minutes together mapping that out. If you are interested in an EQ assessment, then that's something we can do. And I have spaces for one on one coaching packages at the moment. I am
Great.
considering still running Lead with EQ, which is my 10-week program for leaders. So if you do listen to this and you are interested or you want some support for your leaders in your school, then definitely reach out, send me an email. But yeah, I'm always wanting to work with people who want to do this work because, like we've just
Mhm.
discussed, you have to be, at the time in your life where you're wanting to look into this and
Yeah.
deepen your emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I have a few schools who are definitely ready. We've done all of that sort of baseline level of work
Mm,
with me, all of those foundations. And so expect some calls. It's been good.
love that.
Just to wrap up, we see a number of quotes circulating on social media showcasing something really thought provoking and inspiring from thought leaders throughout
Mhm.
time. If a quote from you was circulating, what would it say?
Oh my god. I feel like that's way too deep to just say off the cuff. Um, I think that if if we could all see adults as their child self, I think that we would be much kinder to humans
Mm.
and more understanding. So seeing people as little children is a beautiful tip before starting this work or creating change.
We are all just grown up little children. And this podcast is aptly titled Well Led Schools, which is that play on words to reflect schools who lead with wellbeing in mind. What's one thing that you think that schools can do to prioritise wellbeing that would make the biggest difference in their school?
I think taking taking things away and looking at capacity because
Mm.
when we go wide and not narrow and deep, we just keep putting things on the plate and it's just never going to help. It doesn't matter how fantastic the initiative is or, if it's groundbreaking. If there's just too much going on, then nothing's going to get done well. So
Mm.
just take the things off the plate and, as we say, reduce the load to increase the capacity. I think that's so important.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
I'm going to put into our show notes the ways that our listeners can connect with you. Em, thank you so much for your time today. This was such a great conversation. I know that our listeners will just eat it up. This is exactly the demographic of people who listen to this show, love this stuff. So thank you so much for your time. I'm really inspired and I've had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Well, what a fun conversation. I had such a ball with Em today. If today's episode with Em resonated with you, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on one insight that you're taking away. Because sustainable change in schools rarely comes from big overhauls. It starts with those small shifts in awareness, in regulation, and in leadership practice. If you're listening today and thinking that we need a more strategic and structured way to strengthen staff wellbeing, leadership and culture in our schools, I'd love to invite you to explore the Well-Led Schools Partnership Program. This is where I work alongside school leaders and their teams across a full year, helping schools move beyond one-off initiatives into a clear, evidence-informed roadmap that balances workplace wellbeing, psychosocial safety, and leadership growth. It's the foundations to all of this really deep work into emotional intelligence. You can learn more at adriennehornby.com.au/school partnerships. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you loved today's episode, I'd really appreciate you following along on whatever platform you're listening and leaving us a 5-star review. Stay well. Thank you so much for listening to the Well-Led Schools podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you like this episode. I look forward to connecting with you at adriennehornby.com.au. Here you can get in contact with me, learn more about my approach to supporting staff wellbeing in schools, and get all the information you need about how to work with me. I'm Adrienne Hornby. Thanks for your time and stay well.